Welcome to the Discovering Leadership podcast. My name's Corbin Hannis. As usual, I'm joined by my co-host Carl Bowden. Carl, you want to tell us what we're talking about today?
Yeah. Today we're talking about delegation. And specifically, how do we establish trust when delegating? Now, the purpose of this podcast, the Discovery and Leadership podcast, is about you. It's about investing in you, your business, and your community. We want to build a community of leaders. We want others to help live a positive example for those in their business and those that they influence around them. We're going to be talking about the fundamentals of leadership, crafting strategy, delegation. We're going to be talking about how to live to your true, authentic self. Now, for this episode, establishing trust when delegating, we're going to be talking about how do we develop confidence in others and how do we provide opportunity for others to succeed. And how do we empower others to make a difference? And how do we give others responsibility to have a sense of belonging in a business, in a community, in an organization? So today we are joined by Michael Leytem. Michael has been a talent management consultant and leadership coach since 2011. He has worked with hundreds of Fortune 500 leaders to customize talent strategies and leadership solutions that drive personal and organizational growth. As a published academic with an MA in industrial organizational psychology, Michael has studied the mental processes and social pressures that influence effective leadership. His lifelong passion for leadership, psychology, and mindfulness transcends throughout his work and interactions with others. Michael is also an Amazon best-selling author of his book, Catching Leadership: The Art of Letting Go and Hooking into Leadership Through Catch and Release. Welcome to the podcast, Michael.
Thank you, Corbin and Carl, for inviting me on to the show. I'm excited to be here talking all things leadership and delegation. I love what you guys are doing and how passionate you are about the topic of leadership. So, yeah, happy to be here today.
Well, yeah, thanks again
Awesome.
for your time and just being able to jump on here for a little bit with us. Do you want to tell us from your perspective a little bit about what you're doing in business nowadays?
Yeah, when Carl reads that bio, I kind of cringe a little bit. Not because it's not truthful or accurate. It's just like, ooh, it just seems so buttoned up. But I guess the short of it is, I am an entrepreneur now. I have my own business called Catching Leadership. It's the same title as my book, Catching Leadership. And really, what I'm trying to do is bring a new angle on the leadership development game. Obviously, there's a ton of great leadership development content out there, so professionals need to find the right angle or the right perspective that really jives with them. So I try and combine well-being, mindfulness, trying to take the best of the old school leadership theory, but bring in some new elements to it. And I work with companies both as an executive coach and a consultant. And I also create these experiences, outdoor fly fishing retreats where I can get people out of the office and really immersed into nature to find that inner discovery that they need in order to grow.
That's awesome, Michael. And I love to hear you say that you immerse people in nature because that's also kind of a focus of mine and just focusing on conservation and loving the natural world and everything. But Michael, you have a lot of management consultant and leadership coaching experience. What has been one of the most difficult things in, establishing trust when it comes to delegating?
It's learning how to let go is really what it is. I mean, I think as leaders, we we work really hard to get in the positions that we're in. And usually that's through strong work ethic. It's controlling the things that we can control. But in order to delegate, we have to give some of that control away. And we have to trust
Mm.
people. And they're not going to do it exactly the same way that we would do it. They can still get the job done and they can do a good job. But are you willing to let go of some of the control in order to scale and focus on other areas of your business?
Mm. Yeah, letting go. That's one of the hardest things as a leader.
Oh
We
yeah.
have to have that trust in order to let go. But trust takes times, right? Right?
Yeah, trust isn't something that you can demand. It's something that you have to earn. And
Mm.
I think often about the trust equation, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with that or not, but it's by Charles Green. He wrote a book back in I think 2002 or 2006 called The Trusted Advisor. And I remember as being a young consultant, it was one of the first books that they gave you at orientation, like, hey, read this book. It's about building trust with your clients. But he came up with the trust equation, which if you bear with me here, I'll explain it. And I think it'll bring up a lot of cool variables of trust. So basically, what he says is that trust equals on the top, you have credibility. So that's, your years of experience. It's basically what's on your resume. Have you done this before?
It's like they know
R,
their stuff.
yeah, you know your stuff, right? I've been doing this for 10 years, whatever it might be. R stands for reliability. How reliable is that individual? Do they actually show up and do what they say they're going to do? Because if you don't, that erodes trust right away. So you got to be true to your word. You got to be reliable. The I stands for intimacy. And think about this as like the emotional connection you have with people. Like you're on the same wavelength. I get them. Like I can trust them, right? Because I kind of like them. They understand me. We're on the same page. So that's all on the top. That's the numerator. You want to maximize credibility, reliability, and intimacy with people on your team. And then the denominator is self-orientation or self-interest. And that means people will lose trust in you if they think you're trying to get them to do something that's just going to benefit themselves. Self-interest, self-orientation. So you want to lower
Mm.
that number. You don't want it to be about what you're getting from this. You want it to be about what the team is getting from it, what the organization is getting from it. So your
Mm.
goal is to increase the top numbers and decrease that bottom number, and that's going to increase your trust overall with your team.
That makes a
Wow.
lot of sense. So,
That's huge.
thinking about that and having, say, that self-reliance or people thinking about themselves whenever they're coming into leading a team, or say you said the book was titled The Trusted Advisor. I know a lot of other accountants that call themselves the trusted advisor. I mean, it's in my title as a tax advisor for my clients. Whether I'm leading my team members or I'm leading, say, my clients to achieve their goals, or as Carl as a coach leading his clients to achieve their goals. What would you say holds these leaders back uh, from making the decision to delegate?
Well, I alluded on the control issue because if you are a control freak or a micromanager, I mean, it's just hard to trust other people to get the job done and to do it to the same level that you would. So that's probably the first piece of it. I think the other piece too that I talk often about when I'm coaching leaders about delegation is the concept of flow and putting people into a state of flow. And I'll just explain what this is. It's a concept by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. That's a kind of a mouthful.
Mm.
You can look him up. He has a book called Finding Flow. And basically what he's saying is that whenever you have felt like you were in the zone at work, maybe it was out surfing. For me, it's fly fishing. It means that your skill level meets the challenge. Because if it's too easy for you, you become bored. You're like, this isn't really doing it for me. If it's too hard, you become frustrated. So, in order to effectively delegate, leaders have to know their people so well that they know where their skill sets are and they know that they can provide them a challenge that's going to push them just beyond that. So, it gets them into a flow state. That's kind of a lot of work. It sounds easier, as I say it, put people in a state of flow, but it requires a deep understanding of your people and then having the vision of what projects do we need to be working on for this business that will help them grow, but also benefit our own business.
Wow. That's huge. We have to first know our people. Corbin and I, we've talked about it multiple times on this podcast. It always starts with others, serving others, getting to know your people first in order to lead them effectively. Now, when we're talking about delegation, we have to know our people. What's what's the benefits of delegation once you know your people and their strengths and what they need to be doing in your organization?
It's the only way to scale, in my opinion. I mean,
Mm.
you can be the best expert in your field, but if you truly have visions of growing and you want to have a greater impact, you're going to need to trust and delegate some of the tasks, take them off your plate and give them to other people. And maybe that's
Mm,
not for everyone, and that's okay. As long as you're intentional about it. You say, "Hey, I want to be a one-man band," then fine, be a one-man band. But if you have aspirations to grow your business, then you're going to need to become a more effective delegator. It's just as simple as that. You need to understand your people, like you've alluded to, Carl. You have to trust them, and you have to trust them, especially when they make the mistakes, because they will make the mistakes.
mm,
If you're doing your job well and you're putting them on stretch assignments, they will make the mistakes. And you use those mistakes as learning opportunities for them to get better. And the funny thing about that is, as much as those mistakes will teach them about themselves and what they need to do to get better, they're going to teach you how to be a better leader. Because you're going to say, "Ooh, I didn't think about that ahead of time." Next time you'll be more proactive. The next time you go assign someone, you delegate them a task, you're going to think about the things that maybe didn't work the last time you delegated.
mm.
Most definitely.
That's huge. We have to have trust in people, and in order for them to improve, people are going to make mistakes. They're going to mess up. They're going to slip up. But like you said, it's an opportunity to learn. It's an
If
opportunity to invest in them.
if they're not making the mistakes, you're not delegating right. And I know that's
Mm,
counterintuitive, but if you're giving them slam dunks every time, you're not stretching them.
Oh yeah.
And then
mm,
they're not maximizing their own impact.
See, and to me that sounds like that flow state. It's whenever you were talking about flow state, I talk about hockey all the freaking time, especially on this podcast. I feel like I've mentioned it once every episode, and I told you about it whenever we were jumping into this call before we started recording. But you mentioned the flow state, and I think about when I'm out playing ice hockey. It's something I really love to do. If I'm playing at like a really really basic level, and say just simply going out for like a public skate and just put my skates on, skating in circles around the ice, I get pretty bored pretty quickly. I'm like, I gotta have some friends here to spice this up, or something's got to make this a little bit more interesting. Or on the other hand, when I used to play competitive hockey and we were playing in a level called juniors, there were a lot of guys out there that were a lot bigger than me. I'm not the tallest guy. I'm not I'm not the strongest guy. I'm not the best ice hockey player. That was a little bit too much for me. Whereas now I play on the same team as my dad, and some of my old friends are joining the team, or I'm looking for, okay, what's the right level of competitiveness for me to make sure that I'm out there in the state of mind that I want to be in. I'm not over challenged, or it's not just me spending some time on the ice just so I can spend some time on the ice kind of thing.
Yep, that's spot on. You got to
And
find that perfect balance of keeping you kind of in the zone. So you think about that individually. If you have multiple people on your team, I mean, you just, Corbin, gave an example for yourself and the
yep,
thought process of that. And you have to do that as a leader, of course, because you got to start with yourself.
yep.
But let's say you have 5 or 6 people on your team. Do you know them all on an individual level that you know where their skill set is and where you can get them in that flow state? Now, you're not going to keep them in flow state forever, right? Like
Yeah.
the goal shouldn't be 8 hours a day they're in flow. Like that's just not doable. But they should be getting into flow state maybe a couple hours a day when they're at work, and that's going to keep them more engaged. You're going to be able to retain your talent. They're going to grow. It's going to help everyone. So
Oh
you're
yeah.
totally spot on with that, but it takes that patience as a leader to know it for every single person on your team.
Exactly. And over time, that flow state should change. So as they make those mistakes and they grow, they're looking at, okay, what are the next challenges for not only your business and what you're trying to do, the goals that you have for the organization and the team as a whole, but what goals do these individuals have in their own career? Do these your employees essentially and the people that are on your team, do they want to continue growing with the business? Are the next goals for the business aligned with their own personal career goals? Because if it's not, they're not going to stay in that flow state. They're not going to be productive for the team. They're not going to be helping you out, and they're not going to be making the mistakes you need them to make. They're going to
So let
be doing basic menial tasks and eventually get tired of it and looking for a different solution.
let's double down on that point, Corbin, because this is a unique time with the Great Resignation and the war for talent. And I mean, we've just been hearing about it until we're
Oh,
blue in the face, right?
yeah.
But when it pertains to delegation, it's really important. I think a lot of times companies go into this thinking, I want to retain my people for as long as I possibly can, right? It's most advantageous for you to instill knowledge in them. It's the most cost effective. You don't want to be training new people all the time.
Yeah.
However, it's just not the world we're living in right now. So, if people want to come and work for your business for a year or two, are you okay and are you visionary enough to know that? And then how does that impact the way you delegate to those individuals? If they say, "Hey, I actually want to start up my own company, but I want to come work for you and learn from you for a little bit." Great. Just be open and honest with me about that. I'll put you on different tasks that'll help you achieve that goal. And then I won't be blindsided a year or two when you leave because we're having open and honest communication about it. But that also means that if there's a project in my company that I want to delegate, I may not give it to the person who's going to be leaving in a year. I may give it to the person who's expressed that they want to be here even longer. So I think being open and honest with your communication with your team of what their goals are, what your goals are, only helps you become a better delegator.
I think that's huge. You're focusing on them and who they are. How can they live to their most authentic self? And in that communication, in that relationship with the leader and the person being led, you are constantly being open and honest. There's no there's no guessing in in what you guys are trying to do. But Michael, I want to ask, like, how do you display the confidence in those you lead to know that you got their back all the time and they know that?
Yeah, I guess this is a question for them more than it is me. I think it's just empathy, right? It comes down to emotional intelligence. It just comes down to knowing that everyone on your team has their own unique struggles, desires, needs, just like you do. And they'll have their ups and downs throughout a given day where they're riding high on emotions or down in the dumps. And I think just being as real as possible, cutting through some of the kind of corporate facade of, hey, we're playing, putting on this mask of, how are you doing today? And everyone says, oh, I'm great, I'm great. But really, they're not great. I want to, as a leader, you to tell me when you're not great because that's going to help
Mm,
me better understand where you're at, and then as it pertains to delegation or leadership more broadly, I'm going to be able to lead you better because I know my audience better. So I think
mm,
role modeling is always key. And so I'm able to come to my team when I'm not having a good day, and I don't air all my dirty laundry. I don't talk about all the squabbles or arguments or things, whatever. But if they ask me a question, they're going to pick up on it anyway. They know when I'm actually happy and excited, and they know when I'm like not. So being open and honest and role modeling that then hopefully encourages them to do the same. And the more you do that, the more you build the trust. You can be open and honest with one another, the more effective you can be as a leader, and hopefully they feel like I have their back throughout that process.
I like that. When you talk about modeling, I think of leading by example, exemplifying.
Hmm.
It's completely synonymous. You were giving them that positive influence. And I really liked what you said about just having empathy and being open and honest in communication. It reminded me of a past pastor that I had at a church, and every time I would see him, he would ask, "Hey, Carl, how are you doing?" But he said it in a way that like cut through me, like to my heart, you know. And I was like, how am I doing? And then I felt like I had to like really openly on it and honestly express how I feel. It's not just like, hey, oh, I'm doing great, awesome, like you had mentioned earlier, but how are you doing? Having that genuine feel to your voice, to your intentions, to your confidence as a leader is huge. And I think that's an example that I had learned from just a few years ago.
Yeah, I think just a real quick tip for any leaders who are out there trying to do what Carl just said, like cutting through it and getting to where people actually are. I try and practice team check-ins, which I basically ask my team two very simple questions. One is, how are you doing personally today? How are you doing professionally today? And there's no judgment,
Mm,
and they can say whatever they want, and you'd just be
mm,
amazed at what you hear on both sides. Personally, maybe they're excited they have an anniversary coming up, or a wedding, or what have you. Or maybe something happened. They lost a pet, and you wouldn't know that. But now you do know that piece of information, you can lead better. And the same thing professionally. And as it pertains back to delegation, the topic of today's show, if you ask that question, how you doing professionally today, they can tell you, hey, I'm under the gun, I got these deadlines or whatever. Okay, I'll take that into consideration, and I might not dump a bunch more work on them. Or actually, it's a pretty light week, I'm feeling pretty good professionally, whatever. Okay, now maybe is the time I want to introduce this new project and really stretch them, put them in a new flow state. So asking those basic questions, how you doing personally, how you doing professionally today, and meaning it, and then creating the space to truly listen to them, is going to help you as a leader.
Wow.
So that makes a lot of.
I've ex-
Go on
yeah,
ahead,
go
Carl.
ahead,
You're
Corbin.
good.
Yeah, so I've experienced that from Michael in the past. I've taken one of Michael's courses, and you ask, "How are you doing personally? How are you doing professionally?" And it gets people to understand that, hey, you do care. You do care about the people you lead, the people that you coach, take any of your courses. And I think that's something that has meant a lot to me, and I know it meant a lot to a lot of people that joined in on your course as well. Um, but Michael, I want to kind of switch a little bit. So
Sure.
we're talking about you delegating, but how do you empower others to delegate, to start leading leaders and multiplying the effect or scaling up, like you had mentioned earlier, in your business?
Yeah, I'm doing it right now, actually, within my own team. So I have a group of four of us consultants. One's an intern, three consultants, and one intern. And even with that, I'm not trying to add layers just to add layers, but I'm basically putting one of my consultants in a managerial position to oversee the intern. And I said, you can always come up to me if you have questions, if you want me to jump on a call, you want me to mentor or whatnot. But I believe that you're ready, and I want you to start getting some leadership experience. And it'd be so much
Mm,
easier as a leader for me to be like, well, I'll just handle all the leadership stuff. You all are the busy bees, go get all the work done. But I can't possibly grow my business the way I want to if I don't start trusting and allowing them as leaders to figure out this whole, what's this leadership stuff about? What am I good at? What am I not good at? And make those mistakes in a relatively low risk type situation. So basically, it's about having the vision and the knowledge to say, where are people at, even if they're fresh out of college? How can I quickly get them into a leadership position? And I don't mean forcing people into making like a ton of really high profile business decisions or stuff they're not adequately prepared for. But I think that leadership, we don't wait until we become a manager or a director or 10 years
mhm,
of career experience. Like, start practicing and role modeling that behavior now, and it will make it better for everyone, myself, my business, them, their own personal growth, even if they leave the company, and the people that they manage will hopefully see and learn even from that interaction themselves too. So for me, about paying it forward, it's about putting myself in their shoes. I was fortunate enough to be in leadership positions when I was in my mid 20s. I wasn't great. I'm still learning every day as a
yeah,
leader, to be honest with you. But I was just fortunate to have those experiences. So now that I'm the owner of my own company, how do I pay that forward and give people those opportunities sooner than maybe they even think they're ready for? Because I see their potential and I believe in them.
mm,
See, to me, it sounds like you're trying to establish a deep sense of trust within and outside of your organization. Through every individual that's working on your team, they need to have that sense of trust with their coworkers, the people that are working for them, and those that they're working for, whether that's say you as the owner of the business or one of your clients. They need to be able to trust each other. That way, they have the ability to delegate themselves or own any task that's delegated to them. And they can really, really push out as much. Uh, I'm losing my train of thought. Uh, but that deep sense of trust, just to kind of step back a little bit and step out of what I was saying, how would you say that establishing that deep sense of trust inside of the organization and with everybody that's working on your team, how does that affect each team member or the organization as a whole when it comes to delegation?
So I'm going to bring up a concept we haven't talked about yet, but it goes hand in hand with delegation because it's not enough to just put people on a stretch assignment and then say, I'm done. I've done it. You have to practically coach them and provide feedback. And so to answer Corbin, your earlier question, something I try and instill in my team is really creating two-way feedback. And I know that people say that a lot, but I often tell people that even if they give me feedback and it hurts because I put my heart and soul into this company and I want it to be successful, I know that I'm going to make mistakes the same way that they're going to be making mistakes if I'm doing my job delegating. So I often tell them, thank you for having the courage to tell me that. I'm going to need a minute maybe to
Mm,
process it and to think about what I want to say. But instead of getting defensive and saying, well, wait a second, why am I doing this? I want to, at least let them know I acknowledge that took a lot of effort for you to even bring this topic up. So modeling feedback and letting them provide it to you then opens the door for you to provide it to them when you're delegating tasks and taking ownership, right? So if they're failing on a task that I delegated to them, it may be on them. Maybe they're not showing up and they're not as focused, they're not working hard, but it also might be on me. Did I remove enough of the roadblocks and the barriers as a leader? Did I set them up for success the best way I could? Did I communicate at the right level, not too much, not too little, and then empower them and trust them to do a good job? So I think when it comes to delegation, don't look at it as a one-way street. When it comes to feedback, don't look at it as a one-way street, but look at it going in both directions.
That makes a lot of sense. So keeping all of that in mind, whenever you're looking at it from both ways, it sounds like throughout this whole process of delegation, whether that's from your experience of owning your own business or say your prior experiences in other organizations, what would you say has been the most impactful thing that's happened to you or the most impactful lesson that you've learned in regards to delegation?
Hmm. I love this question. It's hard to narrow down to the top one, but there are some that come to mind. One was, I'll never forget this. I actually wrote about it in my book, Catching Leadership. It was one of my first consulting projects when I was working for a big four consulting firm. And I remember I was in this team meeting and we were doing an IT transformation, an operating model. I knew nothing about IT really at the time. I thought you just go to IT when your computer is broke and it's like a help desk. But apparently, there's a huge side of business that is IT related with all the software and systems and networks and everything that goes on. So that was an opening moment. But the point I'm trying to make here is I had a partner in that room. Actually, I don't think he was partner yet. I think he was an MD, but he was trying to make partner, and I was showing him one of the deliverables I was working on for the client. And I remember him giving me like the most nitpicky feedback on font sizes, colors, and just like aesthetic things on my slide. And not to say that there weren't mistakes on that, but I was like, but is the content okay? Like, is what I actually put in here like strategic, thought provoking, of the right quality? And I remember just being like, this just doesn't seem like the best use of time or the layer spans and layers in that company. Here I am, a senior associate, and this person almost partner, and he's giving me feedback on like font size and the nitpicky tactical stuff. So that was kind of eye opening of like making sure that you trust your people, you know, well enough and you have the appropriate feedback and leadership levels throughout so that someone who truly is that high is giving more visionary, strategic, whatnot. Now, granted, he was helping me and it was helping the end product. So I get why he was doing that. But if you rewind the tape back on him, he probably worked his whole career up as a consultant and was getting all that feedback along the way and expected perfection all the way. But somewhere along the line, as he rise through the ranks of leadership, he wasn't able to let that go. Like I talked about earlier on, let some of the smaller stuff go, or tell your managers below you, say, hey, Michael needs a little bit of help with just some of this fine tuning. Can you take that on yourself? Because when I get a few minutes with him, I want to make sure that we're aligned on the big stuff.
I really love that. Michael. We have to let it go. Let some of those things we learned in the past go. Hand it off to someone else. Let them lead. You know, activate your delegation power, your influence, and give them the opportunity to start, living to their strengths, to who they authentically are. That leader you're talking about, they had to kind of transition into more of a visionary strategic thinker. It was a little different than his past position. That's when you delegate.
And here's the flip side of that. So he actually read my book and he read that part. And I obviously kept all the names out of it and kept it anonymous. And he said, "Wow, I didn't realize I had that impact on Michael." And it's not
Mm,
like this guy was a horrible guy, right? Like I mean, he had a lot of pressure and stress, and in a lot of ways, he took me under his wing, and he trusted me, not knowing much about IT, to come in there and help on a major consulting project, right? So I don't want it to seem like he was the bad guy or whatnot. However, my point with this is that it was an eye-opening experience that he realized, wow, something so little like offering that type of feedback in that setting had a profound impact on Michael, and it made him
mm,
hopefully reflect and say, all right, in the future, maybe as a leader, I need to be more aware of how and when I
mm.
choose to speak up and delegate or provide feedback, how that does truly ripple across. So it's just about being more mindful, being more intentional as a leader, and knowing when to bite your tongue and when to be intentional about when you do want to give the feedback.
That's it. That's a big lesson. Everything that we speak or live to other people, any kind of model behavior, anything that we exemplify to others can have a huge impact. And we need to take that seriously as leaders because we want to positively influence others.
Mm-hmm.
Michael, you have given us so much amazing content today. We want to thank you so much for being here, for giving us your time, in order to invest in some of our listeners. But before you go, we want to give you the opportunity to share anything that you would like to share with our podcast audience.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. First and foremost, if you liked some of the different perspectives I shared, you definitely need to check out my book, Catching Leadership. You can go buy that on Amazon. If you go to my website, catchingleadership.com, you're going to be able to take a free assessment. It's a leadership development assessment, it takes 15 minutes, and it's going to give you scores based on each chapter within my book. So you can kind of use this book as like a guide. You can jump around, go to chapter 3 if that's where you need the most work done for yourself. I tried to make it as helpful and useful for busy leaders who have a lot going on in their life. So that's first and foremost. Check out the book. Um, Secondly, I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I was actually talking to my wife about this. I'm like, does it make sense to still be on Facebook, to be on Instagram, and to be on LinkedIn? But we're really trying this upcoming year to really focus in on LinkedIn. So I have a company page, it's Catching Leadership, and then my own personal page, Michael Leytem. I try and post a bunch of stuff about upcoming leadership retreats that I mentioned earlier, different leadership topics, different angles and perspectives. So go give me a follow on LinkedIn. Let's get connected and help each other out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Michael. For our podcast listeners, check out the book, check out Michael's LinkedIn. He has all kinds of amazing content, and he really likes to get people out in the wild, learning from nature as well, which I think we all need a little bit more of here today.
It's the greatest teacher, is what I say. I can kind of give you a few concepts of leadership, but you go out into nature, and everything you need to learn as a human
Mm,
being can be observed out in nature.
It'll be right in front of your
awesome.
eyes.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right. Well, thanks to our podcast listeners for listening to today's episode on delegation. But we're going to continue our next episode with the delegation series, and specifically on how to prioritize tasks uh, to be delegated. So, as we're talking today about strengths, knowing our people, how do we prioritize those tasks as it relates to however it relates to whoever we're leading? Do we know our people? Now, you can check out every episode every other Tuesday, either on Spotify, Google, or Apple Podcasts.
And then also make sure you check out Enturian.com. That's ENTURIAN.com. Take a look at exemplifyleadership.com as well. Carl and I are posting updates of the podcast across all of our social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, etc. If you go to our websites, you'll be able to follow us across the board. If you want to see the video version of this podcast instead of just listening to it, you can check out the Enturian YouTube channel. Again, that's ENTURIAN.com. Last and foremost, we want to remind everybody, alone we survive, but together we thrive. Thanks for tuning in.